Alright, everybody. Welcome to the Natural Chimneys podcast. I am your host, Caleb, and I am joined with my associate, Jacob.
Hi.
Today we have an exciting and honestly somewhat challenging topic to tackle. We'll be diving into the landmark case that sheds light on one of the most complex legal doctrines in the contracting world. Jacob?
Sovereign immunity.
There we go. Specifically, we'll be talking about the C&L Enterprises, Inc., citizen band, Potawatomi Indian tribe of Oklahoma. This case is a prime example of how the doctrine of sovereignty and immunity can make a business dealing with tribal governments, especially contractors, particularly tricky. Sovereignty immunity provides tribes with legal protection that shields from lawsuits. This can create significant roadblocks when disputes arise over contracts. Whether you're in construction, business development, and any other industry that might involve working with tribal entries, understanding sovereignty immunity is crucial. So, let's take a little closer look at the case, how sovereignty immunity came into play, what lessons contractors can take away when entering into agreements with tribal governments. Jacob, you want to take us away?
Absolutely. Sovereign immunity is meant to protect tribes from lawsuits, meaning they can't be sued unless they explicitly waive their immunity. And while that's great for the tribes, it can leave contractors in a difficult spot, very tricky situation. For contractors, it's not just about the work they do, it's about making sure they can enforce their rights if something goes wrong. The case we're discussing today, C&L Enterprises, is a perfect example of how things can get very complicated, go very wrong very quickly when tribal immunity intersects with business relationships. This is exactly the kind of issues contractors need to understand deeply to avoid being caught off guard.
Alright, so let's break down the C&L Enterprises, Inc., the Indian tribe, or the case mainly. A construction company entered into a contract with the Potawatomi tribe to build a building on a tribal land. And the contract was clear. The work began with the expectation that everything would go smoothly. However, though, as the project progressed, dispute arose primarily about payment for services and timeline and completing the work. Eventually, the situation escalated, and the C&L Enterprises found itself suing the tribe breach a contract. At this point, we ran into a first major issue. The tribe invoked its sovereign immunity, arguing as a sovereign entry, it couldn't be sued without its consent. Here's where things get a little interesting. This case, it made its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Pretty big, eh? Pretty big. That's some crazy stuff. Never mind. Which had to grapple with a very important question. Can a tribe waive its sovereign immunity when it enters into contact? And if so, what happens when disputes arise? Jacob, you want to answer that question for us?
Absolutely, Caleb. The court had to balance two important principles here. On one hand, there's the concept of tribal sovereignty, which protects the tribes from being sued. On the other hand, the court had to consider the practical reality for contractors. If a contractor enters into a contract with a tribe and the tribe breaches the terms of the contract, should the contractor have a legal remedy? The case turned on whether the tribe had waived its immunity or whether the court even had jurisdiction to hear the dispute in the first place. The Supreme Court ultimately sided with the tribe, affirming that sovereign immunity was in play. The tribe couldn't be sued unless it had explicitly waived that immunity within the contract. So in the end, the ruling protected the tribe's sovereignty but left contractors in a tough spot. If they didn't negotiate specific provisions in the contract to protect their interest.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. And now we will go into the topic of arguing of the topic. The challenges of sovereignty, immunity, and contractual relationships. So, what does this all mean for contractors? Well, here's the hard truth in the end. Even if you've signed a contract with a tribal entity, you could still find yourself in a really difficult situation. If a dispute arises, unless the tribe has explicitly waived its immunity in the contract, unlike dealing with a non-tribal government or private entities, where you can often rely on judicial systems to enforce your rights, tribal immunity can leave contractors with very few opinions. Jacob?
Exactly. That is where contractors really have to be vigilant. In the case of CNL Enterprises, the company found itself with no legal recourse after the tribe invoked its immunity. It didn't matter if they completed the work as agreed or if they were in the right. If the tribe doesn't waive its immunity, the court simply does not have power or have authority to hear the case even. This is where contractors can get into real trouble. It's a really sticky situation. Without an explicit waive of immunity, there's almost no way to enforce the contract if things go wrong.
Really?
The tribe has built it, they just have a built-in legal shield. It's like
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, and that brings us to one of our most important lessons for contractors. You cannot overlook the issue of sovereignty immunity. You just can't.
It's a rookie mistake.
It is a rookie mistake. You just can't do it. Contractors need to be proactive about making sure the language of the contract is crystal clear when it comes to immunity. If a dispute arises, the last thing you want is to find that the tribe has revoked immunity. And if you're left with no legal resource, contractors not just assume that they can go to court. They should insist on having a waiver of immunity in the contract, or negotiate, or I don't know what there is.
Alternative?
Yes, my fault. Alternative dispute resolution methods like arbitration. Arbitration. Thank you, Jacob. This is why I have my side associated, Jacob. He helps me with the words that I cannot say.
Anytime.
Because I'm dyslexic. Which this can often be more acceptable to tribal governments.
That's exactly it, Caleb. But it's also important to understand that tribes don't waive their immunity lightly. They just don't do it. They wouldn't put themselves in that situation most of the time.
I don't want to be in that situation.
You never want to be sued.
It's just not good. It's just not good. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah. Sovereign immunity is deeply tied to tribal sovereignty, and tribes will only waive immunity under very, very specific and carefully considered circumstances. It doesn't happen every day. In fact, they may put strict conditions on how and when they'll waive their immunity. Like, they won't do it just to any people. Any day. Doesn't happen. This is why it's so critical for contractors to have a lawyer who understands tribal law.
Gotta have that lawyer.
It's a worthwhile investment, and who can negotiate these terms effectively and efficiently. Without legal expertise, a contractor can easily find themselves exposed, and you never want to be there. Now, for our ad break.
Alrighty, listeners, let's get real for a second. You know that feeling when you're running on empty, when your stomach growls louder than the podcast guest you're trying to listen to?
We've all been there. Whether it's mid-morning, mid-afternoon, midnight, or let's be honest, worst of all, mid-podcast. Sometimes hunger just hits you, and you're not you anymore.
No. You might find yourself snapping at your friends, questioning even your life choices, or even, worst of all, muting your podcast. Just to have a moment with your inner angry monster.
But here's the thing. You don't have to suffer through it. You don't need to be grumpy. You don't need to be the grumpier version of yourself.
Really?
That's where Snickers comes in. One bite And suddenly, you're the real you again. You're calm, collected, friendly, and you might even be funny. Snickers. Because you're not you when you're hungry. But with a Snickers, you're back in the game. And trust me, your podcast friends will thank you.
So, everybody, viewers at home, audio listeners, go ahead, grab a Snickers. Let that growl, turn it into a smile. Trust me, your hangry self doesn't.
Now, where were we? Ah, yeah. Back to the episode. Enjoy the show. And remember, take care of that hunger. Let's get into some interesting facts about the case. Did you know that many tribal governments prefer to resolve disputes through alternative dispute resolution methods, like arbitration? Rather than going to court, arbitration allows them to preserve their sovereign immunity while still providing contractors a clear method to resolve conflicts.
That's a great point, Jacob. Arbitration causes are becoming more and more common in contracts with tribal governments. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's just, you see it every day now.
Really?
Every day.
Every day. It's a win-win. The tribal can maintain its immunity, while the contractors has a more predictable path to resolving disputes. But this is another area where contractors really need to be careful in.
Super careful.
Both parties have to agree upfront with how arbitration will be handled, and the terms need to be crystal clear in the contract. If that language isn't there, the contractors might find themselves facing a situation where there's no really clear process to follow. And another interesting fact to consider is that the tribes often have their own internal dispute resolution systems. These may not always be familiar in contractors, and in some cases, they may not even involve traditional courts at all. For example, in the CNL Enterprises case, the help me out here, Jacob.
Potawatomi tribe.
There you go. Had its own internal
Yes, sir.
procedures for resolving issues. These tribal courts, or alternative mechanisms, can be a bit of a mystery for contractors.
Very mysterious.
And while these systems are not designed to protect the tribe's sovereignty, they can present challenges for contractors who aren't familiar with how they work.
A lot of challenges come up.
A lot of challenges. All right. Well, that wraps up today's discussion. The key takeaway is this. Contractors need to be proactive and diligent. When entering into courts with tribal entries, sovereignty immunity is a powerful and very legal tool. And if contractors don't account for it in their contracts, they could find themselves stuck with no legal resource, even if they're done anything right. Always make sure that any contract with a tribal government includes clear language about sovereign immunity and dispute resolution methods.
Absolutely, Caleb. While working with tribal entities can offer great opportunities, understanding the complexities of tribal law and sovereign immunity is critical. Without it, it's you're losing money. You're not in the game to make
You really
money,
are.
You know, it's really sketchy business there.
It is really sketchy.
Contractors need to be prepared, be thorough, and ideally seek legal advice from someone who specializes in tribal law. They have a lot of tribal law lawyers these days.
They do.
A lot more than they used to.
I've been hearing a lot more. I've definitely been.
No, I see a lot more billboards nowadays.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I see at least 3 every time I
didn't
go
even know
down
you
the
had a
highway. I don't. The CNL Enterprises case is a perfect example of why contractors cannot afford to take these issues lightly.
Well, that's all for today's episode of the Natural Chimneys podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed our discussion of the sovereign immunity and contractor relationships, insightful, and I hope it was valuable. If you have any questions and want to share your own experiences with sovereign immunity, feel free to reach out to us at our Instagram at natural_chimneys. It's a new account. It might not be super, famous yet, but it definitely will grow if you go and give us a follow. We'll follow you back.
We'll be following back the first 1,000 followers, and if you like our first post and leave a comment,
you get a free T-shirt.
Yeah.
A free T-shirt at our merch store at naturalchimneysmerch.com. Yes, we hope you enjoyed. Tune in next time for our next episode.
See you later.
Bye.